pop in. We'll go ahead and just add people as they come in. So thank you everyone for coming to the Comic Studies Society Research Librarian Cohort's October Forum. And today's forum is Accessing Comics, Blind and Low Vision Comics. I am Jason Larsen. I'm the Comic Studies Librarian at Michigan State University and will be moderating today's panel forum. So what we're going to do, just so everyone has an idea of kind of what the format is today, I'm basically going to let each guest introduce themselves, and they're going to talk about what they do and how that works with comics. And then basically, so about 5 to 10 minutes for each of our panelists. And then after that, we'll ask some questions and we'll open the floor to questions, or we might, with so many people, just open the floor to questions you might have. Please use either the Q&A option or put it in the chat box for the meeting chat. I will do my best to try to pick them out from there. And we'll just kind of go until basically the time is up with the questions. But the first 20 to basically 30 minutes will be basically our panelists talking about accessibility and what they do with comics and accessibility and some of the technologies. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speakers, which is Emily and Nick. So feel free to go ahead and unmute yourselves and go from there. Thank you.
Thanks. Do you want all the panelists to introduce themselves first, or just the ones that are going now?
Maybe just we can introduce everyone across first. That sounds like a good idea. So go ahead.
Since I started, I'm Nick Sousanis. I'm a professor of comic studies at San Francisco State University, and I'm a comics maker.
I'm Emily Beitiks. I am the interim director at the Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State, and I am a comics wannabe and newer to this world, but mostly focus on creative approaches to access.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joanne Pak. I live in Canada and I work in various types of accessible media. Part of what I do is evaluate the accuracy of live closed captions. I also taught at Toronto Metropolitan University, Inclusive Media, and I developed an in-house style guide on described video for Bell Media. I still write audio descriptions and narrate for television, but right now I also work in publishing. And my work in describing videos led me to describing graphic novels. So somehow I managed to merge the two of my passions into one happy outlet.
I think it might be me. My name is JJ Pionke, and I am formerly of UIUC. I am currently an adjunct at Syracuse University, where I teach their disability class. My background in research is in disability for patrons and employees in librarianship. While I was at UIUC, I built the graphic medicine collection, working in conjunction with Mara Thacker, who buys or still buys everything else, and now probably graphic medicine as well. So I like to do a lot with graphic novels, read quite a bit, and hoping to write one day, maybe.
Great. So I think that's us. Yeah, so the short intro to set this up, and we'll be sharing slides in a second. So my work, as people might know, I did a dissertation in comics, and I was all about how to make big ideas accessible. And even while doing it, I realized how inaccessible the work was to a certain group of people. And I would periodically save resources on how to, the few things that existed for comics for blind readers. And when I came to San Francisco State, I had another colleague in visual impairment. And I would say, when I see new things, I'd say, is this a good thing for blind readers, or is it just a sighted person's idea of that? And along the way, we had a student going to do her master's thesis as a comic, and we had this, like, how can we make this accessible? And so we got a small grant and got connected with Emily and the Longmore Institute on Disability, and then used that to have a first event to get some experts to tell us what best practices might be. And that kind of exploded on us into a couple of big events like that, a design competition, and some other things we made, which we'll be telling you about. So I'll hand it to Emily, who's much more the expert on the access part than I am.
Well, it's been a collaboration, and that's kind of one of the biggest points that we'll talk about today is like having the comics expertise and the access expertise in conversation and really is where the best stuff happens. If you want to pull up the slides, Nick.
Yep. One. Find the right screen here. Sorry, here we go.
And I'm sharing a link in the chat to some of those past programs that we've done. So if people are excited and want to do a deep dive, all of those programs are accessible and free online. So want to start off with just a couple of quotes, and we're going to try and bring in a lot of quotes from the work we've done, really centering on blind expertise throughout this whole process. So this is a quote from inventor and entrepreneur Matthew Schifrin, who said, "Everyone was talking about this guy who would climb walls, and I had no idea who Spider-Man was. I asked my dad whether he could tell me about him, and he brought home a comic book and read it to me. It's just an amazing experience. I'm over the moon because I'm understanding every single thing that's happening. And as I get older, my friends get more and more into comic books, and I can't access them because there's no way to scan them, no way to make pictures tactile. And so I'm kind of stuck. I'm in limbo." And if you go,
Can I just,
Yeah.
I want to say to that, I mean, that's just like really has stayed with me. Like, you know, this project has kind of gotten beyond both of our ability to keep up with it, but it's like the kid who wants to read Spider-Man should be able to. And I think we keep going partly because we really want to push the industry to take this seriously and make, you know, make this happen.
Yeah, and the longer we've been doing this work, the more we've discovered other blind folks who are either kind of just always wondering what comics were about, like that quote from Matt, and others who lost their vision later in life and had a love of comics and want to be able to keep that alive. This quote from Chancey Fleet, who's assistive technology coordinator at New York Public Library, shares, "The comic medium offers some unique superpowers we should all get to experience. Access to comics means access to education, to culture, to the intensity and power of sequential storytelling, and to a more creative, engaged, and joyful way of spatial cognition and expression." So just wanted to kick off with these words of folks, you know, really establishing that this isn't just something that we are doing for legal compliance. We're doing it because there is this actual thirst for access out there.
And we, you know, we've had the benefit of working with them and learning so much about what's possible and what's not working. And it's really been generative. I don't know if we want to stay on this slide, Emily.
This is just a slide that has some images from our posters and some of the sketch notes that were generated at some of the symposiums we gathered. And we also have accessible versions of those on the link that I shared. So if you're at all interested in kind of following these panels, they're all available. So let's dive into, you know, how some of the tactics of what we found when we started diving in of what's possible. And again, kind of keeping these words from Thomas Reed, who's a podcast host and an audio description advocate at the center. He says, when we're talking about making comics accessible, we need to always remember, please, to center the person who this is made for, and that's blind people, period. I think that, you know, some of what we found when we were looking at some of what was out there, not all, but that there were some things that kind of seemed cooler in concept, but when you really centered them and you know, got the blind user experience in, it was just sort of like, well, that's sort of thinking more like a sighted person. So I know some of the ideas that we had were sometimes like, oh, thinking too much and not about what it would be like to access it. So it's just this reminder that this really has to center on blind expertise, which, you know, we don't have present with us today.
Right. And I think that's something people think. They're like, oh, well, you just like raise the drawings up a little bit and then everybody, you know, they can feel it out, but it's nowhere near that simple, as we'll see.
So one of the things that we did was host a prize winner contest, because we were also just hearing that there were a lot of people coming to our programs and events who were interested, but like hadn't plunged in and just gone for it yet. So we wanted to encourage it. And we raised just a little bit of money, but just enough to try to incentivize it. And we're able to fund 5 projects being developed. And so we're sharing one of them. Hatia Garip and a whole team of people created a tactile book that also had an audio description version to it. And so part of the goal of the prize contest was to see people, really think about access as core to what they were building as opposed to something that's being bolted on afterwards. So they wanted this tactile element to the book, but they also wanted audio description because the tactile wasn't going to do everything. We also have a project from Ray Lanzarotti, who developed, really creative way of using the tactile, putting Braille on every piece, developing an audio description piece, and having the Braille not be a direct translation, but kind of be its own poem and its own layer in and of itself. So Ray was really playing around with kind of this choose your own adventure to accessing the comic that they did.
Yeah, and in the midst of this, we got invited to do a comic on accessibility for MIT Technology Review, and took it as an opportunity to sort of showcase what we've learned. And I sort of went over the top to make the most visually dense and probably inaccessible comic to really demonstrate how difficult the problem is of making comics accessible. And in the midst of it, talk about the challenges and talk about what are the possible ways to do it, and try to dispel some of the presumptions about it. Emily, you want to?
So we also developed an audio description track for that, and that was also available. So, and as Nick was drawing, I was writing that track, and they were kind of going back and forth and informing each other to, again, sort of model that, like, not having it be something bolted on afterwards. But we, it was a really complex comic visually, but we also had the advantage of it being only 2 pages. So a big conversation to get into today is how much time do you get to spend when you're developing something like this.
Right.
I run a disability film festival, and all of our films are made accessible with audio description. But there's always this set amount of time that you have access to provide because you're looking for the silences and the spaces. But if you're creating an audio description track for a comic, it's really up to you and unbounded, and as far as how much time you can spend. But of course, it isn't really unbounded. Like, there's only so much time you can ask somebody to listen to. So even asking, this 20 minutes for a 2-page spread that sighted people in the magazine probably flip through really much more quickly than that, as much as I'd love to think they spent 20 minutes reading it, is hard to know. So it's part of that challenging, messy work of how do you approach these projects that has to be explored. Part of why you're not going to see a guide out there who says, this is the 3 steps to doing this right. It's much more complicated.
Yeah, I think the more we do this, the more we learn. There's no one way to do it. There's many ways, and we demonstrated here, and then we'll move on. My Not Batman panel here, that we offered 6 different versions of, from the minimalist to the radio drama to the rich description, to show how you might approach it.
So we're going to shift and look through the 3 different types of tactics. Oh, and we need to move kind of faster, I'm realizing. So we are going to talk about tactile, audio description, and then kind of new technologies. And this is a quote from Georgina Klege, who's a person we've learned a lot from as a blind author and scholar. And she wrote, while I would like to dislodge the notion that blind people rely exclusively on touch perception to know the world, I admit that whenever I have the opportunity to get my hands on art, I leap at the chance. So, a lot of times tactile is like the first place that people go, and we want to say like it is limited, but also it can be really a very useful tool for kind of getting that basic layout of like, what even is a comic? What are the ways that panels are playing on a page?
I think the most recognized of these is Ilan Manouk's shape reader, which is, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's its own invented, tactile constructed language that both sighted and non-sighted readers are sort of coming at fresh, because it's not built, it's not adapting existing art, and it's this abstract tactile boards that can be shuffled to tell a story about climate change. Say more about that, Emily, or is that?
You're good, yeah.
And the other one we came across, the Spanish artist Max. This was made for the Venice Biennale. This was a boat tour, like a way to navigate the boat tour. I mean, to navigate the canals in Venice. And and very simplified shapes. The one picture with figures in it, they're stick figures, solid stick figures. We printed a raised one for our exhibition. But it's showing, how you can get sound across, how you can integrate sound with Braille. I mean, how you can integrate words with Braille, and convey a story. It does have panels. It does have textures for water and other kinds of things. But it's not simply taking existing art and raising the lines. It's doing its own thing. And should we go to the next one? And finally, oh, you want to stay on that one or?
No, yeah, good. And so then as part of our always trying to practice what we're preaching here, we took it on with a little bit of Nick's work, both developing an audio description track and wanted to take a test of making it tactile. And so we have on the slide right now the image of what's the original in unflattening and a tactile rendering of it. And we, the huge portions were just too detailed, and you couldn't even try to make tactile without, you could do it if you took this one panel and turned it into 30 tactile images to be the right size to actually make them useful. But instead we just wanted to kind of show the way that the winding path is twisting and turning throughout the page. And so we shared this with our panel of blind experts who were giving us feedback. And, it was sort of a mixed result of like, it still was more complicated. And with an audio guide to go along with it, it helped. But if it was just given on its own with no additional supplement, the feedback was like, yeah, still, this is just too complicated for a tactile graphic to be useful.
Yeah, and it came up like as I was doing the description of the page, I was like, there's no way somebody can keep the track of where they're supposed to be on the page. So I was like, well, what if I make a tactile diagram? So it's not really, didn't make any attempt to get the art across except where to locate you where you were with the audio. And with that, we'll move to audio and get near the end here.
So a comics artist and author who is also a low vision person, Marika Davis, writes, when it comes to audio description, what you add is just as important as what you leave out. You want description that is equal to people who can see the work as much as people who cannot. So to me, I think the best method is to describe the things that are moving the story forward. But this was really a topic we dive deep into, is just how much description do you provide? And do you try to be really, certain describers really believe in objectivity. You don't say anything interpretive. You don't describe an expression because that's who's to say what is the look of forlorn or happy. These things are open to interpretation. And then other folks want much more of that descriptive subjective interpretation because it helps give it much more excitement and intrigue and pull a reader in. We have an image on the slide from Chad Allen's Unseen, which is an audio comic. And this was kind of like the first ever born prioritizing an accessible version for blind people and is made by a blind author. But it doesn't have a visual form that accompanies. So while it's very exciting and accessible, it also kind of raises the question well, what is an audio described comic? How far, what's the difference between a radio drama and an audio described comic, and where are those lines going to fall?
Right.
So yeah, go ahead. You can talk about how we did this with your work.
Wait,
Or skip it.
We'll skip it for now.
Okay. So we also have new methods for thinking about how to make all this stuff possible. This is a device called the Monarch. There's a couple of competing similar devices that are coming on the market pretty much right now in 2025. And they offer tactile refresh. So refreshable Braille has been in existence for some time, but just for reading a line of text. But this is a larger interface, so it allows for refreshable tactile graphics. You still have that same challenge of the graphics have to be somewhat simplified to be able to actually make anything happen in your brain to connect what you're feeling to what is there. But it does allow, the new technology allows for like much quicker, you could load an entire comic in and refresh each time to move panel by panel. It allows zooming in on a graphic and zooming out on a graphic to see more detail or less detail. Go for it.
I did. Did it not show?
Oh, Visling. I meant you can talk about it.
Oh, you want me to? Oh, so this was Darren Dufresne and Aaron Rodriguez. These were been with the project all along, and they were prize winners. And this is an app. So it's got haptic things. It vibrates when you touch certain things. It has audio description with it, and audio with it. That reads the comic and describes the comic and reacts to your touch. And it's in development. We've tested it. I don't know what the latest state of it is, but it's a pretty exciting project, and hopefully also will continue to generate other possibilities. And should we close with our?
Yeah, so just closing out with two final quotes from some of the blind experts we've been working with. This is Josh Mealy, who's principal accessibility researcher at Amazon and a MacArthur Genius Award winner. He said, when I talk about accessibility, what I'm really talking about is creating a way for people with disabilities to participate equitably in a very similar experience to the way the non-disabled participant would. That includes the factor of how much time it takes, how you get at it, how you approach it, what impact it has on you emotionally and physically. So that's an accessible experience, but it's also possible to create alternative experiences that try to sort of convey the same information, but are quite different from the experience of the primary material might be. So I think this is really important for, getting at one of Nick and my biggest takeaways is like, this is just, it's a creative process. It's not going to be about compliance and following these simple steps. It's about bringing that same creativity to the creation that was brought to the creation of the comic in the first place, to look for balance between trying to make sure the blind user is actually engaged, and this is a good use of their time to listen and experience it this way, and also trying to, keep the integrity of what that original comic was and how to make that translate, because it really is a translation, as opposed to kind of some sort of direct process to compliance.
Yeah, I mean, that's so much what came up with trying to adapt mine, is that like, it's, how do you keep the spirit of what it is, but also make it something exciting? And it's really a creative act to pull it off. And finally,
we
Yeah.
have a quote from Chansey again. Who says, blind people know that we can create, demand, and normalize access to comics because our community has done the same thing for text on the web, for the mobile web, for museums, and so many other things. We know what we need in order to shape a more accessible future for comics. We need an informed conviction that the media matters. We can talk about that with stakeholders. We need a working knowledge of how meaningful, satisfying, scalable access can happen, and what access techniques are suitable for different types of comics and situations. And more than anything, we need each other to stay in touch and also to amplify what we discover today, so much that every blind adult and child, every educator, every parent, every ally, every publisher knows that comics are for everyone and knows exactly what is possible. So as part of the work we've been doing, we also created an exhibition about how do you make comics accessible, that explores a lot of this, that has a lot of these quotes that we featured today. We'll post the link to that because we have a virtual version of that, and we are also looking for more locations. So just a quick little promotional plug there if you're interested. Thank you. We ran over. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. And so a good way to connect to that is we'll have Joanne go next and talk about like her work, because it kind of actually backs into what you both talked about. So thank you both so much.
Hi, everyone. I lead the Literary Image Description Project, or LID, which is funded by the Government of Canada and administered by an organization called eBound. Our focus is on making accessible illustrated books, especially comics and graphic novels, in 3 different formats. That's Braille, EPUB, and audiobook. And these aren't just for people with vision loss, but really anyone with a print disability. That includes dyslexia and mobility issues, such as turning a page. All our books are available through accessible libraries like CELA, which is the Center for Equitable Library Access, and they're free to anyone with print disabilities. Public libraries can acquire specific books to add to their collections, and if anyone is interested, you can contact me and I'll hook you up with the publisher. We created a best practices guide based on input from print-disabled readers, accessible book producers, and academics. And it's filled with tips and examples, and you can find it on the APLN website. That's the Accessible Publishing Learning Network. And I'm going to post a link right now in the chat window. There you go. And it's mentioned in the guide that it's not meant as a set of rules, but suggestions based on what's worked for us, right? And it's also a living document. So the hope is that it'll continually get updated to keep up with new technologies and cultural shifts. I know there are already a lot of guides out there for alt text, but we specialize in storytelling and providing entertainment, not just information. So we encourage the use of expressive language and literary devices. Now, what is also unique is we work with artists and authors and help them to write their own descriptions or act as consultants. And this helps ensure the descriptions accurately represent their work. And it also maintains the same tone and the style. We also take publishers through the whole process of conversion. We connect them with service providers and teach them to make accessible EPUBs on their own so they can keep the work in-house and save money. Ultimately, the project really encourages books to be born accessible. That's so at the outset of creation. And while we do a lot of remediation and conversion, we also get publishers and authors thinking about accessibility for their future projects. Right. In our next phase, we hope to do some market testing and basically see if the general public would be willing to pay a nominal fee for a described version. I have a lot of sighted friends who are very fascinated by what we're doing. And so we'd market this as bonus content, sort of like a director's commentary on a DVD. So whatever revenues a publisher can earn will then be used to make more described books. So cost is always going to be an obstacle for small publishers. So it's why this is always on the forefront of my mind. Comics are incredibly challenging to convert because of the volume of images and the need to maintain, a fluid storyline while constantly interjecting with alt text. And then with audiobooks, you have to hire many different voice actors and studios for all the different roles. So it's great to talk about best practices, but I'm really hoping that more people will join in the discussion around funding and generating revenue streams to make accessible books a normal part of doing business. And we hope librarians and public libraries will also help us get the word out by acquiring and promoting described books in their own collections. Okay, I'm going to show some examples now for the EPUB. Each illustrated page is followed by the dialogue and descriptions in plain text, so everything is accessible by the screen reader. I'm going to share my screen. The Reckoner Rises, Breakdown, written by David A. Robertson, illustrated by Scott B. Henderson.
Page 59. Cole and Eva twist in the direction of the stranger. A warm brown hand hangs like a Wild West gunslinger, poised at the hip. The man wears the black Mio security uniform, with gold stripes running down the thigh, broken up by a cargo pouch. Recognition fights with disbelief, as Cole stares at the security guard, unable to tear his eyes away. Eva stands behind Cole, looking over his shoulder at the guard.
Cole whispered, "Is he really there? Is that really Mark?"
Okay, so it's not pretty, but that's due to the current limitations of screen readers. And in the future, we're hoping that AI will improve in its ability to replicate natural speech. And year over year, it does get better. For Braille, we take all that text that you saw and create digital Braille that can be read through a tactile device that Emily and Nick talked about, the HumanWare devices. And so the Braille dots come up and then refresh. For audiobooks, the commercial version is in MP3, so anyone can listen to it. Sometimes I'm able to use AI voices for very short excerpts. These are more sophisticated than the screen readers. The quality isn't really there yet, but once it improves, again, I'm hoping it'll help save money and make the process a little bit faster. So here are 3 examples of audiobooks. I chose very different styles and scenes to showcase how we handle mood, conversations, and children's books. Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell, illustrated by Faith Erin Hicks.
They stand still and listen as a white ribbon of music wafts over their heads through the sapphire blue night sky. Feathery red lines dotted with golden yellow music notes dance around like fireflies. Inside the ribbon are the lyrics, "All my bags are packed, I'm ready to go." Josiah points up to the ribbon.
Do you hear that?
Is that John Colorado Springs? I love John Colorado Springs.
And they're playing your favorite song.
Deja's eyes suddenly flash wide with realization.
What's wrong?
I just realized that this is my last night with the world's greatest John Denver cover band, and I missed the show.
She covers her gaping mouth with her hands.
You didn't miss it.
He holds out a hand. She takes it, and they dance. The ribbon of music spins and swells all around them while they cut a rug on the dirt trail, surrounded by lush green cornstalks. Deja crinkles up her nose with glee. Josiah twirls her under their fingertips. They gaze into each other's eyes. Then Deja lifts up an arm and they croon.
I'm leaving on a jet plane.
They swing and sway, joined together by one hand.
I hate to go.
Their faces light up with joy as the music ribbon glides by and fades out like a gentle breeze.
Ducks by Kate Beaton.
Another day in the break room, Katie sits at the table with the Newfoundland crew. Brent counts on his fingers.
House, truck, bike, skidoo.
Nah, Brent boy. Skidoo, then bike. More snow up here.
I've never seen anyone on a bike here.
They're not talking about bicycles.
He points to Tyler.
Buddy here skidoos to work, even up the frozen river.
You do not.
Tyler turns to face them, raising his index finger.
Safer than the highway, isn't it? How many accidents so far this year?
So you getting a bike or what?
Yeah, in spring.
We should find some trails.
That'd be deadly.
Tyler gives Brent a thumbs up, while Ambrose watches on with a judgmental glower. His eyes and brows flatten into straight lines as he rests a hand on the countertop. Behind him is a coffee maker with a half-full pot. Katie looks over to him, nursing her cup.
These young ones, spending their money like fools.
That's not true, no. I works hard for my pay.
Chuck crosses his arms as Ambrose pours himself a cup of coffee.
Jesus, got to enjoy life a bit too.
Wife's got the house she wants.
House is too big, brand new trucks, piles of toys. You're only digging a hole.
Heh, yeah, a hole that's full of oil for 100 more years.
The grand banks were full too.
Brent scrunches the left side of his face up in a doubtful sneer.
Jump and dine, Jesus, boy. We're on a dory, is it? The grand fucking banks, is it?
All I'm saying is you only knows the good times, don't you? Let me tell you, my son, that don't last. You can't make it. It's not up to you.
Simon and Chester Super Sleepover by Cale Atkinson.
It's early evening when Chester arrives at Ricky's house.
a dark sky casts a purple glow over the neighborhood. In a series of crooked panels that are scattered like broken glass, Chester approaches the house and gazes up at the tall front door. Bare tree branches cast long, gangly shadows, and a cluster of red balloons floats nearby. A green glow seeps out from under the door. Chester slowly reaches for the doorbell. He presses a finger against the button. Ding dong! His eyes grow wide with terror, and beads of sweat trickle down his face. Then the door swings open, and a dark, towering figure appears with glowing green eyes.
Welcome.
Okay, and I think my 10 minutes are up there. So yeah, it was really hard to pick and choose because we have so many great graphic novels that were made, and some are really quite abstract and wonderful and beautiful. But maybe I'll share them on another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne, so much. Those were amazing. I could understand why that's hard. Like the comments in the chat are like, oh my gosh, ducks, and like it's blowing up. So there was a lot of cool choices in there. So thank you so much for sharing those. And we'll go ahead and turn to JJ to finish out with our panels, and then we'll open the floor for questions.
Sounds good. Who are my librarians? Do I have librarians? Are there librarians? Where are my people? Yes, at least one librarian, 2 librarians, 3 librarians. Ha 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 ha. Woohoo! Okay, so we've got a bunch of librarians. Awesome. So this is a little bit more for librarians than other folks. So some real talk, especially when we're thinking about collection development. One of the things we have to remember is that when we talk about blind low vision, we're talking about roughly 50 million people. Okay, so blind low vision is going to be pretty ubiquitous across the United States. You're probably, if you're a public library, you're probably most familiar with older folks looking for like large print books and things like that, which is great. You know, sometimes we don't have enough large print collections. In terms of Braille users, of that 50 million people with blind low vision, Braille users are about 100,000. So even though we've talked about some actually really cool technology that is making comic books much more accessible, especially to Braille users, before you invest in the technology, make sure that you have a population that you can serve. So if there aren't any Braille users in your community, it may not make sense to invest money into Braille material. Especially when you could invest your money in other places that are going to hit that blind low vision group much more easily, right? So one of the things out there, we heard some graphic audio, and this is just one commercial site that I am throwing into the chat right now, with graphic audio description, right? There's also podcasts that do sort of the radio teleplay kind of thing. Like I just finished listening to Vows and Vengeance, which was put on by, I think it's EA Games, for the launch of the new Dragon Age video game coming out on Halloween. Very excited. So thinking about graphic audio, thinking about podcasts that our users can take a look at. For blind low vision users, there's also comic book scripts, and these are actually really useful or interesting, especially when the person is interested in hearing not just like, the zoom pop, Superman stands up, but also thinking about like camera angles. The camera pan, there's a pan in on Superman's hand. There's a pan out onto planet Earth. things like that. Unfortunately, the scripts, there's not as many as we would wish. Like, there needs to be some advocacy and gentle nudging of various comic book publishers to deposit scripts into the comic script repository. That would be really great. So it kind of depends on what kind of experience your blind low vision comic readers want to have, right? The Comixology and other broad market, large market providers, it's not great. What Joanne and Nick and Emily were talking about is far better than what's mostly on the market in terms of a big market. So finding what your people want and what you can afford, and then find that nice happy place of what we're going to purchase and what we're going to do. So that's something to think about. As a disability expert, I tell people that disability and accessibility is not one size fits all. It's unique to the person. So even though someone may be blind or have low vision, what's their flavor of blindness? Do they have central vision? Do they have peripheral vision? Do they have no vision whatsoever? There's a lot of nuance about how that vision or no vision works. And that's true for any disability. So the best thing you can do when you're thinking about how do I assist my patrons, is what do your patrons want? Like, actually have a discussion with them, and say, hey, are you a Braille reader? Would you prefer to have this kind of material or that kind of material? And so forth. So I'm going to hop off my soapbox so we have plenty of time for questions, because I could froth at the mouth of disability and accessibility forever, because unfortunately, the library world is not accessible. We are very proud of our ADA compliance, and one of my signature, moves is ADA compliance is the floor. Why are we proud of that? We should not be. Being accessible is something different. 30% of the US population has a disability of some kind. We can do better. And not just for one particular group with disabilities, but for all people with disabilities. We become more disabled as we age. I wish somebody had given me a memo that when I hit 40, my entire body was just going to fall apart. Like, seriously. So yeah. Okay. Questions, answers. Let's go.
So, well, thank you, JJ, so much for sharing that perspective from the library. I appreciate also laying out that the floor is the bare minimum, not where we should shoot to strive for. I think that's important for a lot of librarians to remember as well. And also, so we do have one question in the Q&A, so you can either use the chat or the Q&A. John Martin had asked a question in the chat about for those who weren't catching it, that those were great descriptive narrations. I noticed that none of them used any racial or gender description, though. Is that a purposeful choice or something that might have occurred elsewhere in the text? And it looks like between Emily and then Joanne, it looks like it got answered. But so those who weren't following it, Joanne's response was, please keep in mind these are very short excerpts. The characters are fully described by race, body shape, clothing, and styles, etc. at the outset. So just to make sure everyone saw that question, if they had that, and that way we can kind of answer that question inside the chat. If you have more, feel free to put them out there. I do have one in the Q&A from Barbara Dillon. In your experience, when publishers request audio described books, are they making this version of the book accessible via their own website or an existing digital distribution channel? So I don't know if Joanne, Nick, or Emily, or even JJ, if anyone wants to to answer that question for Barbara, that would be great.
For us in Canada, it's not really a thing yet. We're currently, well, in the past, we were making accessible books without the publisher or the book creator's consent. That was just through the Accessibility Act, we're allowed to do that, specifically for people with print disabilities. But now we are involving the publishers, and we would like to try marketing it to the general public. So this is all very brand new, and we're going to give that a try to see if the general public would like to, throw in an extra $1 or $2 and help us create more accessible books. So yes, great question.
Excellent. And so then we'll flip to JJ actually put one in the chat. So Joanne, being up in Canada, First Nations is far more active. Does your group do audio description in native languages?
We have done some books, but it's very difficult to find someone who is local that we can get into a studio. But oftentimes we will hire people who are out somewhere else, like on a reserve or something, and then they'll find a recording studio near them. So it is difficult, but we have done it. We do a lot of Indigenous authors' books as well. Reckoner Rises, the EPUB sample that I showed you, made a fantastic audiobook as well. But I was just unfortunately showing you that EPUB screen reader version of it. But yes, we always try to do lots of Indigenous books, Indigenous authors and their subjects. Yeah.
Thank you. So another question from Barbara. In addition, as a member of the media and a board member of the Graphic Medicine International Collective, is there anything I can do to support promoting these services to other publishers, creators, librarians, medical practitioners, etc.? So any one of our panelists feel free to answer that.
I have things to say. I have so many things to say. Yes, lobby publishers in terms of getting what they're creating to be more accessible, whether that's putting scripts in the script archive or doing graphic audio versions or whatever. There was a question earlier that Joanne answered about, well, whose job is it? The law is not super clear. In terms of libraries in the United States, we are required to provide a remediated item to someone using a screen reader, theoretically at the same time that it is available to someone who doesn't need a screen reader, right? This is a bit of a change from what was before. And hold on a second, LACCD. Okay. So if you want to read the court case, it's Payan versus LACCD. That court case has been kind of a bombshell because this was happening just before the pandemic. And basically the court ruled that if you have a blind student asking for Harry Potter, that blind student needs to have access to that book in an accessible format at the same time as a sighted student. This was a major issue because in the past, the university or college library or whatever you want to call it had, a lot more wiggle room. Like they had like 30 days, which honestly is ridiculous. So the biggest issue is moving that burden onto publishers so that we as librarians don't have to do the remediation part. There are some groups in terms of remediation. For instance, Hathi Trust allows you to access everything, even if it's in copyright, for accessibility reasons. But, how many graphic novels are in Hathi Trust? The answer is not many. So, getting together as a consortium or as part of a consortium and lobbying graphic content creators, comic book creators, publishers, etc., is actually really important. It would be really awesome if the collective we could follow in the footsteps of the Library Accessibility Alliance. And that group has done high level, what do you call it? Accessibility scans of like databases like ProQuest, EBSCO, Web of Science, etc., in order to exert pressure on those companies to be more accessible. And it's been successful. So, you know, it's making a concerted effort, working together. But yes, definitely want to be exerting that pressure, because ultimately a big university like University of Michigan, they can do remediation, right? But a community college like Harper College in Palatine, Illinois, not so much. So things to think about.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And that's, we actually like a lot popping questions here. I feel like Ricochet Rabbit trying to keep up. So we're going to go ahead and try to get to the next one here. So Victoria asked, what is your experience with providing accessible comics for languages other than English, and in Canada, non-French, non-English readers, as CNIB Beyond Print provides both English and French? I'll be sharing an example of a freely accessible comics for Japanese in chat, i.e. for voice comics. So does anyone, Joanne or anyone else, want to comment on providing accessible comics in other languages besides, basically it looks like non-French and non-English readers?
Basically, once we have our script written out, our description script, it can be translated into any language. It's the descriptions have been written with the author's approval. So I think it's good to go. And that's kind of what we do anyways. We take that script and we convert it into Braille format, into EPUB format, into audiobook format. It can be pretty much any format, as well as other languages. So that would be my suggestion. I did try working with Japanese manga publishers and librarians. They just didn't have the resources or, you know, to really go there. I do have to say that going back to the previous question that JJ answered very well was in regards to how all the publishers that we work with are dying to do this. They really want to open up a new market, you know, new consumers. I mean, it's great for them, and they want to do the right thing. But really, it is the cost. It's one thing. I think the easiest way to go about it is to create the EPUB, because it's just the written word. And unfortunately, no blind person will actually take out an EPUB version, because it's just too really, it's just grating. It's hard to listen to by a screen reader. But as long as it's still in existence, that hopefully in a couple of years to come, you know, we can it'll sound a bit better, and it'll, you know, it might be usable in any case to sighted readers who want the descriptions alongside the images.
Can I I'm competing with Nick. Can I respond to the synthesized voices? Because I know that came up for sure on one of the early panels we had, is very, very strong, without a doubt, preference from blind community for real actors. I think we have a tricky thing here between wanting to see so much stuff become accessible and AI presenting the gift of time and speed for making things accessible. And you also have a lot of describers are blind folks, and that has been a source of employment when so many blind people are facing, you know, dramatic unemployment compared to sighted folks. So ideally, we're advocating for this service and thinking about how it really does have potential to expand the audience. Netflix started offering audio description on their films, you know, by requirements of law, and they found that the rate of people who were using them was higher than just blind community, and that people were starting to learn you could put on audio description and do your dishes, you could put on audio description and drive a car and still watch your show, which seems maybe a little too addicted. But you know, it's to say that, like, we really should be thinking about investing in the actors, and I know you know this, because it's not, you know, the audience that might spill out from that is larger. Some of the other disabilities have been mentioned, but for example, I've met neurodivergent people who really benefit from audio description because of the way it will provide language of like what is visually happening. If subtext is hard and challenging for you, that can be another accessible version. And also just more and more students who are kind of growing up in a multimodal world where they like want to experience things in different formats. So just a keep fighting for those actors.
Yeah, well, I was jumping back like 2 questions ago. I mean, I think advocating that's as JJ went into pretty well. Keep pushing it that this needs to happen. It needs to happen for, for superhero comics. It just seems like it's a given. I've had some small conversations with someone at one of the big publishers about our project, and I think I was going to push you to say what you just said, Emily, about them seeing how it feeds their bottom line. And I think the audio description company that's been working with us is, they recognize that this will help the publishers, not just for their blind audience, but for beyond their blind audience. So once they get started on it, I think once it happens, I think publishers will see that it makes sense to do. But convincing them to make that first step, it seems to be a little harder than it should be. And I don't know, Emily, if you wanted to add more to that, just because we've talked on this, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's the answer has been like the bottom line is money, but we're often trying to push for like the limited thinking of that. And so many classrooms are using graphic novels more and more as accessible way to get kids excited about learning, but no public school can take on a textbook that doesn't have the descriptive version. So starting to sort of see this as commercially viable, even though ideally we could just convince them to do it because it's the right thing. But trying to like have that creative thinking around like, well, this could unlock new commercial possibilities, but that's pretty uncertain still.
I mean, I think they're willing to try it with like one-offs. I mean, that's the sense I got from speaking to them, but getting them to do it with their monthly books, it's going to take longer, but I think, ask for them to, write letters to them, whatever. At some point they're going to have to, I would think. And the fact that all the films or nearly all the films and shows are, at some point that should shame the comics people into getting on board too. Much smaller industry, I know, but I don't think the cost is, I don't know.
Those are all good points. So I want to make sure because we're getting we have like about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure I get the last couple of these questions answered. So we have like 2 more queued up. So if we have time for any more after that, we'll see if we can, but I want to make sure we get these last 2 answered as we're getting to our last 15 minutes here. This is more of an open one for our panelists. This is from Barbara. Would it be permissible for me to contact you all, as I would love to coordinate a connection with the teams at digital distributors like Hoopla and Library Pass, which is known as Comics Plus in the educator space. So if you all wanted to do that, if you wanted to either put that either in the chat, if you have like a preferred contact method, or if you wanted to provide that to Barbara directly. I just wanted to see if I want to make sure to at least ask the question if any of you or all of you were amenable to that she could reach out to you, or if you provide us that contact information to us, I can make sure to connect with Barbara. And Emily and JJ have put theirs in there. And it looks like the last question then is going to be from Jenny Robb. So go ahead, Jenny, and fire away.
Thank you. I couldn't figure out how to type enough, so I hope you don't mind. I'm just going to ask it to you all. So I'm the head curator of comics and cartoon art at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library Museum, and we have a little bit of a different use case that we're just trying to figure out how to even start, how to even tackle this. And what it is that we have a very large original art collection. So we have over 300,000 original cartoons. And we have 2 different databases where we've scanned these originals and we, provide images. But we do not provide any kind of description, whether text or audio of these images. which is not at all compliant ADA wise. So we are looking at, how do we address this on a mass scale? Because we've got, in one of the databases, there's 100,000 records. In the other database, there's 20,000 records. And we are just trying to figure out how do we even begin to think about this? How do we go back now and provide something that would be meaningful to someone who was low vision or blind, who wanted to access these images in our database? And I just wonder if any of you have any thoughts about where we could even get started. So these aren't full books. It would be like one page of a comic book or one comic strip or one political cartoon. And I'm just curious if you have any thoughts about that.
Oh, I have thoughts. I always have thoughts. You're talking, I would say, more archives or museum than library, which is, of course, you're right, a very different type of use case. In terms of quote unquote fixing your problem, what I personally would do is IMLS grant. Do a big grant for conversion where you can hire a team of graduate students, postdocs, fellowship, whatever, and hook that into a potentially larger project where you're working with another archive, or potentially like Jason, who's in charge of a very large collection at Michigan State. Boo, Michigan. So that, you're creating a potential repository that's cross-linked between institutions. There's plenty of researchers that would love to access your material, but as you said, because the metadata isn't there, with descriptions and things like that, it's going to be really hard for them to use that material. So that's what I would do. But that's also coming from a, research librarian perspective. Maybe other folks have something different. I think I saw Emily's hand up.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think really low tech, because we're used to doing things scrappy and no budget. So, the first thing I would do is just be able to offer that, like, if somebody who's blind is trying to use your database, that you have a team member who's up for making an appointment and navigating it and describing it live with them. And the person can say things like, oh, I like this kind of description, or do you see anything like that? And have it be interactive. That person's labor of a couple of hours is going to be, a really useful resource that helps that person feel they have control of what they want, because obviously the full database is just going to be impossible to do overnight. And then, my second piece of advice would be just starting somewhere and gradually, getting some student assistants and training them on it, and starting to gradually, whenever new things are added, you're putting it in. And, I think a lot of times, I work with a lot of museums where oftentimes, because there's so far to go, that stops them from doing anything. And so yes, it's not going to happen overnight. All the disabled folks I'm in community with understand that and have waited since, 1990 when the ADA passed, and we're still waiting for things and still waiting for things. And it's but seeing those slow steps chipping away, it makes a big difference.
Yeah, I was going to say the same, and then direct it to Emily. I think, we've done some activities with students working on describing comics pages, just, for class, and then like drawing comics based on the description. So, it's interesting activities, but even that first level of it, at least it gets something in there, if maybe eventually it's replaced. And then I spoke at a university at Santa Cruz, and they to sort of get at my book, and they knew that I'd been involved in this project, they assigned students to pick a page and do description of it. And this is pretty interesting how they tackled it, which, where their best practices are is probably all over the map. So you'd want to be working with them, but I think it would get a good start. It would get a good start to before you get funding to do a bigger project and a bigger project. But But we certainly could talk more with you on that, and be happy to.
I just want to add, those are all great suggestions, by the way. But I want to add that we do a lot of remediation, and where we usually start is by relying heavily on user feedback and user requests and what is the most popular. So you start with those things and you make those people happy, and then ask them to be very vocal about how it's changed their lives. And that's what we use to go and get more funding. This is proof now, right? From users who are whose lives have been changed somehow, students and such. So that would be my suggestion.
Awesome. Thank all of you. We're pretty much down to the last 5 minutes, so I'm going to turn this over to Mara in just a moment. Before I do, I want to thank all our panelists today. This has been a really, really interesting topic for me. It really has. So I want to thank Nick. I want to thank Emily. I want to thank Joanne. I want to thank JJ, all 4 of you for sharing today and taking time to share with us. Hopefully everyone has also who's in the chat has also had a great chance who's been watching on Zoom. We appreciate it. And I will turn it over to Mara, and thank you all.
Hi, thanks, Jason. I don't have a huge amount to say. I just wanted to echo the thanks to our panelists and also let you know that if you thought that this was educational and a good use of your time, we will have another panel. I believe we're looking at dates in December about advancement, donations, and associated issues for comics librarians. If you are not already a member of the Comic Studies Society, you might consider joining, and you might consider joining the Research Librarians Cohort. And thank you all very much for being here, and hopefully we will be able to share slides. We'll talk to the presenters. Hopefully we'll be able to share slides after the presentation and after everything is closed as well. So have a great rest of your afternoon, and thanks for joining us.